May the words from my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. But when you are invited, go and sit down at the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, "Friend, move up higher." Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. Good morning. In my work in my secular employment as an engineer and technologist, I get to go to a lot of technical conferences. And some of them can be very small, just a couple of hundred people. And some of them can be very large, 30,000 plus, especially right before the pandemic. And it can be one of those where you have to turn sideways to try and walk through the hallways with all the different groups of people getting to their conference rooms. And it never surprised me that at some point I would hear TED and turn and look, and in the midst of all those people find someone from either the Cincinnati area or someone I had met at another conference and had found me in the midst of all that group, or I could do the same thing and see people. But I was at a conference for just 200 technologists, and it was designed to be a marathon day. We were going to meet in the morning, we were going to meet in the afternoon, and we were going to meet in the evening. And the way it was designed is we had two adjoining rooms. So in the first room where we had the technical sessions and our discussions, and then they wanted us to move into the second room in order to have lunch. And I'm sure they were doing that to make sure they didn't lose us, so that we would go back and be on time for the start of the second session, because it was a packed day. We were moving. I had found a person that I had collaborated with on a couple of projects at the first session as we were in the first room. And we had made the decision that let's try to sit together at lunch so we can talk, because we'd never actually been able to meet in person. So when the morning sessions finished and we were instructed to go into the other room, I waited to be able to meet up with my colleague. And as we started working our way into the room, we started looking for a table that would have two seats sitting together. And of course, every time we stopped at a table and asked, "Are these seats taken?" Yes, they were. People were reserving seats for colleagues and friends. So we kept moving our way through the room. Now, the room had tables that would seat about 12, and they were circular tables, and there was no set pattern. There was no center aisle to walk up. And as we kept working our way to the room, we came to a table that was empty. And we were starting to talk and thinking, well, let's just stay right here, and when it's time to sit, we can sit. And we really got deep into the conversation and wasn't paying attention much to what was going on around us. When the signal was given that everyone should now make sure you take your seat so that we could begin the lunch, we sat down and immediately marveled out loud, well, this is great. We found a table that has enough open seats. And then a voice said to us that this table is reserved for the speakers. I have to be the only one that has this happen to him. And so I'm thinking, how in the world did I get us into this situation without even trying? Because there was nothing on that table that said speaker's table. There weren't the little place placards that indicate who should be sitting here. It was just a table like all the others. Now, yes, there was a podium, a very simple one, with a microphone. But because of the way the tables were laid out, that podium was near several tables. But there we were, sitting at the speaker's table, uninvited. And like good engineers, my colleague and I immediately began swiveling around looking to try and find a place to go sit. And yes, there would be an open chair over there, and there would be one over there, and maybe there's an open one right there, but clearly we couldn't find anywhere where we were going to be able to sit together and to continue the conversation. What's more, the leader of the event was now making a beeline towards our table and to the seat right next to me. And I knew him from previous conferences, so did my colleague, and so now that's confirmation. I did somehow get us to the speaker's table, unintended. The leader of the event is a wonderful, friendly person. He stands about 6'5", so even though I may be tall, I'm always looking up when I talk to him. University professor, teaches physics, comes from Texas, and so as he's approaching and coming around, I'm standing up, and so is my colleague. I know everybody in the room is watching because clearly we're right there in the center of attention, and started stammering out my apology, and we're going to try and go find a place to sit, and I can't believe I did this, and he just puts a hand on my shoulder and said, "Sit down, son. Of course you belong here at the table with us. Just rest and enjoy the meal." You know how the room temperature starts to return to normal in those situations? Maybe not blushing so much, can begin to let the heart rate slow down and just relax. And so immediately things had changed, and now we had gone from being uninvited to invited to be at the speaker's table. And so it turned out to be great. We were being able to continue our conversation, and we were going to get lunch. So, with that one simple gesture, the host had turned this awkward situation into a situation of comfort. And, it was an invitation, right? It was not a promotion, but a way of saying, "You're welcomed here." In our gospel passage this morning, we hear that Jesus has been invited to have another meal with a member of the Pharisee community, and it's on the Sabbath. Now, we hear the first verse and then we jump a bit, and so what we don't hear in between is that Jesus heals a person who shows up at that dinner on the Sabbath. And we know that there have been encounters with Jesus and Pharisees and lawyers about not healing on the Sabbath, so I'm sure he knew that everybody there was watching what he would do and he would say. And so he would turn this into, and he did turn it into, a moment of teaching. Now, from what I've read, at that time during Jesus' public ministry, when there was a large banquet held, one of the customs was to seat all the guests at cushions or sofas, reclining together, and they would put them in groups of 3, and the place of honor would be in the center. So clearly everyone could see who was special and honored. And it was also quite fashionable, evidently, that the person of honor would arrive fashionably late in order to be escorted to that position so that everybody knew exactly who was special in that gathering. And if you were unfortunate enough to end up at the table by accident, you were escorted while everybody else watched to another spot. Jesus has this opportunity to speak to the people gathered there with him about an approach they need to take towards life and towards each other. It sounds like in this passage that this is a wonderful lesson in good social etiquette, but it's really a message to all of those who were gathered there for that meal, and for all of us who are hearing it this morning, that the message of how to live a good life is not to expect to be served and not to expect to be honored or put first, but to do the opposite, to expect to serve, to place others ahead of us in the order of priority and importance, to in effect become a servant. It would have been easy for Jesus just to have the meal there with them and talk with them and perhaps debate about the healing, but he used this opportunity before, as we can tell in the text, before it turned into a debate, to speak to them about what it takes to live a good, holy life. And all through the summer passages that we've been reading from Luke, I keep hearing this recurring theme and this invitation of living a holy life, of living a godly life. And how do you do that? To live a holy life and a godly life is as simple as making sure that God is first and foremost in our lives. That we take the opportunity to be in daily conversation with God, as Jesus did, and to be listening at the same time. You know, I have told people in the past when they ask me, so how do you pray? Well, yes, you know, we pray the prayers of the church, but then I also have that wonderful chapel time in the morning when I'm in my car driving to my secular job, and it's about 40 minutes away, where I can turn off the radio and turn off the iPhone and no podcasts and just be quiet and spend that time conversing and praying with God. It really turns out to be wonderful chapel time. And some of the people I have shared that with have come back to me later and said that that made a difference in their lives when they realized, wait a minute, there are other ways to pray, and look what this does for them and how it would put them at ease. And as one person shared with me, be ready to go into a ministry of being present to others. It's just that quiet time and that dialogue. It could be a formal prayer, or it can be a discussion with God about whatever is going on. But the call to a holy life and a godly life is to remember that it doesn't start and end with us. It's an invitation, and it is a pouring out to God and allowing God to fulfill in us God's plan. We are called to be humble before God and to be reverent before God and be ready to serve one another. So in effect, it's like sitting at that other cushion, not at the head of the table, but being ready to do whatever God calls and invites us to do. Jesus extends that invitation to us this morning in this lesson that we hear, and it's one that we need to embrace. And while I'm not sure that he was doing it as a good social etiquette lesson, it actually turns out to be a good one at that as well. It wasn't my intent to end up at the head table at that conference, but I was invited along with my colleague because of a gracious host. And the interesting thing at that dinner, as we were wrapping up that lunch dinner, was that looking around, that table was only a third full. There was plenty of room. Had we not been there, there would have only been 3 people at the table. But after we had been invited and the meal was being served, we launched into a conversation on technical topics that when they signaled it was time for us to get up and go back into the assembly room to continue the formal meetings, we all lamented that we didn't want to leave. We were having such a good time in the conversation and enjoying each other's company. And making assurances that we would try to meet up and perhaps continue the discussion later in the evening if it was possible. All because of an invitation that turned the situation around. All of us today are invited to the banquet and to this table, which has more than enough room around it for everyone. And this table is linked with tables all over the world where combined there's more than enough room for everyone. This table is like that last piece in the jigsaw puzzle that when it's put into place, you stand back and you marvel at the beauty of what has been made. And the invitation that brings us here is not because we could do something in return. It is because Jesus gave us the Eucharist out of love for us as we are. And the invitation is for us as we are. And all we have to do is to accept that invitation, to allow God to provide for us, and to be open and listening to his invitation and his calling. And then gather around the table to be nourished, and then go forth and invite others to sit down. Sure, your place is here at the table. Enjoy, taste, and see the goodness of the Lord. Amen.